I just was getting really no options or methods of healing that were actually helping me in the midst of this particular instance of dealing with chronic pain. I had to start listening to something else, and that something else was my own inner voice and intuition, which I feel was deeply strengthened by learning how to listen to and interact with the natural world.
You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Hey, welcome back everybody to Feed Your Wild. This is your host, Vanessa, and I'm so glad you're here. Today we have a really cool episode. We are speaking with Asia Suler of One Willow Apothecaries. If you don't know Asia, you are in for a total treat. She's awesome. And before we get into our interview, I just had a couple of quick announcements. First, we have our winner of the challenge for a free Akashic Record session with me. And for those of you who participated and wrote reviews, my heart is so full. Thank you so much for participating. I'm a crier and I just cry every time I read them, and they're so touching. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your continued support. If you feel called to write a review and to rate the episodes as you like them, I would be so appreciative. And our winner is Jamie, and Jamie, you are such a lovely soul. So happy to be able to support you in this way. I'll definitely be having more of these in the future. These are so much fun, and I love giving away gifts, so stay tuned for more of that. I also wanted to remind those of you who may be interested, or those of you who haven't tuned into previous episodes and haven't heard about our upcoming group program. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be an 8-week journey together as a very small, intimate group of people. And it's going to be launched this spring, most likely in May. If you've been dealing with health challenges, chronic illness, and you know something is off and it's related to maybe a deeper soul level issue, this is the group program to check out. We'll be bridging the scientific and the spiritual using a functional nutrition approach and the tools that I use in my practice, as well as the Akashic records and looking into your Akashic soul records. We'll be working together as an amazing group of wild-hearted change makers, as well as your own spirit guides, teachers, and loved ones through the Akashic records. If this sounds remotely interesting to you, make sure you get on the list. The link will be in the show notes. So go ahead to your show notes, click that link, and put in your name and your email so that you can get on the list to learn more and get access when that opens up. There are very, very limited spots for this. This is really a beta version of a group program that I'm putting together. And we're diving deep in these 8 weeks working together. So if this speaks to your heart and your soul and your body, make sure you get on that list. And you'll also get exclusive access to special pricing that will not be available anywhere else. So there's really no downside, and you can always unsubscribe. So if you are interested, go ahead, click that link, sign up, and I can't wait to get to know you. I will be announcing more information to that list later this month, so I'll be talking to you soon. All right, let's talk about today's episode, you guys. We have Asia Suler. She's an amazing teacher, concoctress, and word weaver. I love the way that she seamlessly brings in the sacred of the seen and the unseen worlds. You know, I'm all about that with this podcast. And her knowledge is so heart-centered and comes from a deep, deep ancient wisdom that she carries forward, as well as through her experience so far with health challenges. She talks about how a chronic painful condition called vulvodynia really initiated her into the plant path and opened her up to the luminous in the world. Asia talks about using her intuition to uncover aspects of her condition and how we can connect back to our own intuition and the natural world and what to do about sensory overload. So lots of recommendations for those of us who identify as highly sensitive people, empaths, etc., who may feel overwhelmed at times. We talk about trees as teachers, the power of silliness, Dreamtime, and how to open our hearts for greater access to the collective wisdom that's available to us, including, of course, plant allies that can support us in this deep work. So much goodness in this conversation, and I encourage you to check out all of Asia's offerings. They're so beautiful and filled with a wealth of information that are both practical and magical. All right, here we go with Asia Suler. Welcome back, everybody, to Feed Your Wild. Today is a special episode. They're all special, but this one's extra special because we got Asia Suler on. And Asia is a writer, teacher, and herbalist living in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Western North Carolina. She's the creator and concoctress behind One Willow Apothecaries, an online library for earth-nourished healing, handcrafted medicine, and alchemical gateways of education. Asia's work is a unique combination of Western and energetic herbalism, stone medicine, earth-centered shamanism, and intuitive healings. But most days, she'll just say that she's someone who has fallen deeply in love with the living world. Asia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Vanessa.
I first have to start off by saying that I have a co-host, Megan. We do moon musings every new and full moon. And she wanted me to make sure that I did a shout out for her. She loves you and your work. She's done your programs. And she's really, really stoked to have you on too. So she sent me a whole bunch of questions, but she wanted to make sure that I conveyed that.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I appreciate and honor your work because you have this beautiful way of weaving the sacredness of the unseen world and intuition into earth-based and plant medicine. And I've really come into the understanding that this is what is really needed. It's really critical at this time to remember that and to begin to erase the illusion of separation of body, mind, spirit, and healing. And I know every herbalist has a story of when they first began their plant path. So I'm curious for you, Asia, how did it all unfold? Where did it start for you?
So it really started for me when I was in my late teens and I developed a chronic pain condition called vulvodynia, which basically means that you're experiencing vulvar pain, and oftentimes doctors don't know why. So for me, this pain condition was the result of several things, which included examining trauma earlier in my life. It also included the fact that I was getting chronic yeast infections because of an undiagnosed intense reaction to and sensitivity to gluten. Anyways, long story short, I started developing this chronic pain condition when I was in college. And what I often say is that the world inside my body became so uncomfortable, I had to go out. And I started interacting with the plants and the land around me. And really, that interaction with the plants was in so many ways where my healing began and where I first started to understand what medicine truly is. And I'm sure if anyone who's listening has dealt with any kind of chronic health issue or is currently dealing with something in their health, it's pretty common that people will end up stumbling into the world of alternative medicine or herbalism because they feel really failed by Western doctors. And that was definitely the case for me. At one point I was told really the only recourse to get better was to get surgery to remove nerve endings. And
oh, geez.
yeah. So, but for me, it was really my initiation. That experience of dealing with chronic pain and chronic health issues ended up being this initiation. And it really pushed me to the brink of this space of recognizing the numinous in the world. I think there's something about dealing with issues in your body where you start to really understand the vulnerability and the fragility of yourself, and also really take a step towards that threshold that marks the seen and the unseen. That you start to develop this conversation with this unseen aspect of the world. And for me, it was opening a conversation with the plants that really helped me to feel like there was hope, like I belonged, and like there was meaning to everything that I was experiencing in my life and my body, and that there was really a greater purpose for why I was experiencing this and why I was here. So that really opened the gateway for me. And I went on to just really try to interact with plants in any way I could. So I became a landscaper and I worked on organic farms, and I moved to New York City and got the only job I could find interacting with plants, which was taking care of people's office plants in their buildings. And so really, I just kept following that thread until eventually I woke up one morning and just knew I actually had to go to school for herbalism. And that's when I moved down here to the Blue Ridge Mountains to study with the Chestnut School of Herbal Medicine, which at the time they had a year-long in-person program. And so that's where my formal training in herbalism started. And I'm really grateful for all the ways in which I've been able to explore the plants and their constituents and learn scientific names and understand body processes. And at the same time, I find myself continually cycling back to these first lessons that I really learned of honoring direct connections with plants, of really being open to direct revelation, and the idea that so much healing can happen on what we call an energetic or spiritual level. And of course, I'm not the first person by far to realize this or talk about this. And at the time when I was in college, I had the opportunity to study under Molly McGlennon, who is an Anishinaabe professor and writer, and who was piloting the Native American Studies program at the college I was attending. And so I was exposed to a lot of contemporary Native, mostly North American writers and thinkers who were really affirming me in this moment and affirming this experience that I was having of really being a person and a living being in a living world. And I think, so just to mention that, this is not something new, and this is something that's been, held and nurtured by Indigenous communities around the world for a really long time. And I think in the Western world, and especially those of us who are sort of farther away from our Indigenous roots, this is a time where it's really flourishing back into our imagination. And I think it's because we really need this medicine so deeply.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you had a lot of moments with plants where you were able to experience that. Was there one plant in particular where you could remember that connection on all those different levels really coming in for you as like one of the primitive experiences that you had on this path?
Well, I think a lot of times one of the first connections that come in for people in this realm of plant communication is with trees. I find that trees are often like these gatekeepers. And then if we think back even on our childhood, those of us who grew up around trees, we can probably remember a tree that really stands out in our mind or that we had some sort of relationship with. So what really opened it back up for me when I was in college was a specific tree that I would go and visit. And to this day, I actually don't know what species of tree this was because I didn't know plant names at the time. I just literally went out and learned plant personalities by hanging out with these different beings. And so I remember very strongly going to visit this plant, and it was always a certain part in the path where I would turn off and I would go visit this tree. And I started to have this feeling when I walked on the path, like I could literally feel this being reaching out to me before I got there. And it would bring tears in my eyes because I could literally feel the ways in which my presence was welcomed, which is just, it's a story that we're not often told, especially in the world of environmentalism, that we could actually be welcomed by the plants. So I would have to say that one particular tree, and I'd love to get back to campus one day and see if I can ID this tree. But when I go further back, even further into my history, really it was the willow tree that was planted for me when I was born. So this willow tree is the willow of which my business is named, One Willow. And this willow tree really was like the being growing up that connected me to the living world. I remember distinctly climbing into the branches of this tree, and I would bring my journal up there and write. And it was the only being of the natural world, probably barring my dog, that I would talk to and that I would tell my dreams to, and that I really felt like was not only listening, but sharing with me. And when I think back on that experience, I really feel that this willow tree was a bit of a guardian for me and this ability to keep this connection to the living world alive. So I recommend for people who want to make these connections to think about, was there a tree in your vicinity growing up that you had a relationship like this with? And if you want to reopen this relationship now, to really put it out there into the world to meet a tree being that is willing to help you reopen this. And it's no coincidence that in a lot of world traditions, including some of the European traditions that are part of my ancestry, there was this concept of the world tree, that trees are these metaphors for our ability to travel between the realms, that the roots of the tree can go down into the lower world, the place of soul, and the trunk of the tree is here in the middle world. We're here in our embodiment, our day-to-day lives, and the crown of the tree branches all the way up into this realm of spirit. So there is something about connecting into trees that can really help us begin to shapeshift and move and recognize these different realms.
And I love that trees, I feel like they're getting a little bit more recognition, at least in pop culture, and books being written about them. It feels like there's a bit of a resurgence, like hey, remember me as this intelligent being, and remember that we have these connections. And it makes me wonder, and I'd love to hear your take on this, as children, just as you had painted the picture of your childhood, we have these innate connections and a connection to our own intuition without judgment, because it just is. And then somewhere along the way, it gets lost or hidden or blocked. And so how did that happen for you? Like, how did you find yourself on a path where you experienced more of the physical hardship and then bringing yourself back to that space of reconnection to your intuition?
One thing I had to learn, was this concept that we all are our own healers. And even on a very physical level, even if we are taking an herb for its physical constituents or we're taking a pharmaceutical, the way that it works is that this external medicine interacts with our unique body chemistry, with the parts of ourselves that are already in motion to help ourselves to heal. And I think that we tend to give away a lot of our power just because of the cultural story we're handed about who can heal and where healing can come from. And I think because I just was getting really no options or methods of healing that were actually helping me in the midst of this particular instance of dealing with chronic pain. I had to start listening to something else. And that something else was my own inner voice and intuition, which I feel was deeply strengthened by learning how to listen to and interact with the natural world. Intuition it's part of human nature. And I would say it's actually part of how the living world functions. When we think about migration patterns, for instance, we try to understand the way in which this is working in an animal's brain and the way in which possibly, the electromagnetic grid of the earth is interacting with the creature's brain. But ultimately, really what we're talking about is intuition, like knowing when to move, knowing when to harvest, knowing when to sleep, knowing when to court another. And so I think connecting into your wildness, really, again, of being a part of the living world actually innately opens up this flood of intuition. And for me, it felt like a life and death kind of scenario, of at least the death of my spirit, of I need to listen to this inner voice and learn how to listen, or I don't really know how I'm going to be able to keep really like engaging with this world and keep my heart and my hope alive. And so I started listening to just the small hints that I was getting about, different things to follow. Like I remember out of the blue, one day I had this thought popped into my head, which was, maybe you're allergic to gluten. And, this was over a decade ago. So it was really not something that was being talked about in the wider culture almost at all. Mm-hmm. There was very little gluten-free products out there, but it was like this, I was like, what is gluten even? I don't even know what that is. And I had to like look it up. And literally like within a week of cutting it out of my diet, I went from, basically being in a constant state of having constant yeast infection and inflammation to just completely having it drop away, which was just mind blowing for me. And it came entirely from this place of just intuition, being open to listening. And I think this is a skill that we all have. I mean, it's so innate. It's just like with any skill, if we're not in a culture that values the development of that skill, then it's going to atrophy. But we have the ability to build up that muscle again. It's just really the being willing to listen, being willing to trust that inner voice and take a leap. I mean, it's scary because we're told oftentimes that our intuition isn't necessarily trustworthy, that we need, the flow chart or the pro and con list in order to make decisions. And so it's oftentimes about really facing our fears and our fear around being able to trust ourselves and trust the natural world around us and really navigate our life by these subtle hints.
Yeah, it makes me think about reading or listening to stories about other cultures and peoples who have a closer relationship to their environment and land and native practices, and how they are able to perceive things that would be very difficult for, someone, let's say, living in New York City, right? Where they can understand bird song and bird language and understand when, sailing and being able to perceive various messages from the environment of what's to come. And so it makes me think about how we almost don't have space for it in our modern world. Like we've kind of blocked it out because we've literally filled ourselves to capacity. What are some ways that people can begin to maybe open themselves up? And then also the trust piece, I think, is really huge, like not being able to trust yourself.
Yeah, honestly, the how to start opening yourself back up is to just spend time in the more than human world. And that doesn't mean that you have to get yourself out to, a pristine national forest to do that. Some of my deepest connections to plants came in when I was living in Brooklyn. But really spending time with plants, spending time with animals, going out to the park and sitting there without aim. I think one of the things that prevents us from really connecting is that we always are having a goal or a task in mind. And that's really not when this intuition or this communication comes through. So learning how to be a witness, and a really solid practice for this is to have a sit spot. So to find a place in nature or a quiet corner of your yard or a local park where you can go and sit, ideally every day, but if every day is not a possibility, once a week, and just sit there for half an hour. Set a timer and just sit there and notice. And I think, what you're sharing sort of about the sensory overload in our culture is absolutely true. Many of us are on sensory overload all the time, especially those of us who are what you'd call highly sensitive or empathic. We literally have nervous systems that take in more sensory information than the quote unquote average or normal nervous system. And so we're constantly bombarded with a lot of sensory input. So even just knowing that the first couple times you do this sit spot exercise, you might just be like digesting and composting and learning how to digest and compost the sensory overload so that you can get to the place where then you can really start noticing things, like noticing how the grass isn't just one different species, like there's a bunch of different plants growing in the grass, or noticing how the colors of the leaves on the tree change depending on the time of day and the light that's reaching them. And it's all those little things that you start to notice that actually open up the relationship again between you and the world around you. And just initiating that intimacy is so important.
I remember, I think it was you, hearing you speak about when you start this process, if you're a beginner, and feeling a sense of silliness come over, and that's actually a good thing. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I first started talking to trees and hugging plants, like I would feel so silly and embarrassed. Like I wouldn't want people to see me doing this. And it really hit me as I went deeper into this work, how important that feeling of silliness is. So when we're children, silliness is actually this process where we look around at what we're being handed as basically like the normal thing or the cultural truth, the way things are normally done. And silliness is when we take that piece of the way things are normally done and we turn it on its head. So like, putting a shoe on her head, for example. Like we laugh because it's silly because we know shoes aren't supposed to go on our head. So it's us learning from an early age how to play with the inherent cultural rules that we've been handed and how to delight in that play. So as adults, when we have this feeling of silliness come up, I think it's really helpful to reframe it as realizing that you are playing with the cultural norms that you've been handed. You're starting to experiment with them and turn them on their head and see, is there actually another way of interacting with this? And I think we often code being silly as an adult with this feeling of shame. And shame is like the ultimate disconnect emotion. Like shame will disconnect you in a nanosecond. And so we really sometimes want to shy away from feeling silly because we feel ashamed about what we're doing. So I think just even the idea of turning this definition a little bit and being like, yes, I am silly because this silliness is actually helping me to expand my perspective and expand the cultural rules that I've been handed.
Oh my gosh. When you brought up shame, so much came to mind. I think that's something that definitely can hold us back in terms of our, not just, in terms of our intuition, but our capacity for self-healing. And I know working with a lot of clients that are dealing with more like reproductive challenges or issues, that shame is a big part of that. Did you find that to be true for yourself? I'm curious in your journey with the chronic pain.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think anytime we're dealing with any kind of chronic issue, there's shame because we have something in our culture that is constantly telling us we should be, big, bright, healthy, balanced, eating all the kale, doing all the yoga all the time. And it's just totally unrealistic. And then, compounded with that was, this chronic pain condition for me was vaginal. And so anything having to do with our genitals, our reproductive system is like inlaid with a sort of double whammy of shame. And I think that one of the things that drew me most powerfully to working with the plants was how non-judgmental they are. Like the living world doesn't judge us. The living world just sees us, sees what is, and accepts it. And I think having a relationship with the plants is really like having a relationship with an angel, because they are just there, continually giving to us, continually making our life possible, continually caring for us in such a state of just non-judgment and acceptance. And so I think we are in a cultural time where we're starting to actually have more conversations around shame, like the work of Brene Brown. And it's super important because, as she says, shame is like a gremlin in the closet. And the moment we start talking about it and expose it to the light, it has much less power within our lives. So we're talking about this, sort of ingrained aspects of shame that we have in our culture and the ways in which shame can control our behavior. And I think really developing these healthy relationships to the web of life, which is how we were meant to function as human beings, it really like lessens the intensity of the sort of negative programming that we're handed by being in human culture, because we can really see that there is a much wider field of knowing and culture in the world that includes, really natural laws and natural and innately benevolent and compassionate ways of moving. And so for me, plants can really help us to release shame.
Yeah, huge. And you were speaking to, highly sensitive people and empathic folks who might get hit harder with some of these things and even take on, I think everybody takes on a lot of what is not even theirs. What are ways that, especially for those who identify as highly sensitive or very intuitive or empathic, to begin to nourish themselves and to release some of these elements like shame or anything that's not really theirs, but might be a construct of their family or society? There's so much there. How do we even differentiate?
Right. Well, the main, and I identify as an empath and a highly sensitive, and the main issue that we come up against is overwhelm. So a lot of times anxiety, depression, these are symptoms of overwhelm. And so the first thing from my experience that we need to do in order to be able to tap into our intuition and to be able to know what's mine and what isn't mine is to actually address the overwhelm. And this is where the whole idea of self-care comes in. And I would just suggest for people who feel they're highly sensitive to actually think about the ideas of how can I cut down on the sensory input coming into my field, and how can that be a part of my self-care? Like for me, I love taking baths in part because I love being in water and I find it's like very relaxing and soothing for me. But it's also because when I'm in the bath, I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not looking at a screen. I don't normally read in a bath because I don't like getting my books wet. So literally I'm just sitting there in the darkness for an hour. And really, when do we ever do that? Like it's very rare at this point in time in our culture that we just sit in a dark room for an hour and pretty much do nothing. And what it does is it really helps your nervous system to like reset to this baseline. And the thing about being a highly sensitive person is that it's actually pretty amazing, because when we can learn how to cut down on overwhelm and encourage our nervous system to know how to rest and reset, that sensitivity is what makes us these, amazing conduits for intuition and information that are coming from, the unseen world. So that's, I think, what I would hand is just asking yourself, like at the end of the day, what are the practices that you can use to reduce overwhelm. So sensory deprivation of any kind, like putting on an eye mask or putting in earplugs, body touch, any kind of embodiment practices to actually get back into your body. It also really helps reset your nervous system to like actually get your heart rate up and be moving your body. So I think self-care in general can sometimes, the term can feel a little overwhelming. Like I know for me, I was like, I don't really know where to start with that. Like anything could be self-care, and then self-care can just become another to-do. So to really frame this idea of self-care as like self-care is a way to limit the sensory input and the overwhelm in your life, and to know that it might be that maybe you're engaging in self-care for 2 hours. Maybe the first hour is literally just you coming back home and you still feeling like really scattered or out of your skin. And it's the process of just coming back home over and over again. And it's something that we do need to do on a daily basis. Like I have to do some of these practices, like meditating, for example, with my eyes closed on a daily basis, because I just will easily get overwhelmed and not even realize that the anxiety that I'm experiencing or the sense of disconnect that I'm experiencing is because I've gotten too loaded with information and I'm disconnecting in order to deal with the sense of overwhelm.
I'm so happy you're speaking to this. It's interesting because I work with the Akashic Records, and I do a reading monthly on the podcast. And one that came through recently was a message for the collective, was the importance of silence and space, and how we need to cultivate more silence, which is interesting. And one of the practices that came through with that was just how imperative our sleep is, like how sleep time and dream time can function as what you were speaking to, creating that space where you're limiting that sensory deprivation, but then it's opening up channels of sensory perception in different ways that might nourish us. What are your thoughts on dream time? Because here we're talking about intuition. I'm curious if you have any tips or insight in terms of the dream world.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, the dreaming has been a huge part of my journey. I've kept a dream journal since I was actually like a young person, and it has always been like a direct connection for me into my intuitive realm. I found when I started working with plants, the plants would start appearing in my dreams. And now I often know which plant to work with because of who is showing up in my dreams or what plant name I'm waking up with in my mind. To me, dreaming it's a remembrance of where our consciousness goes when our body goes to sleep. So it's a remembrance of the fact that our consciousness is actually partially stepping out of our body and exploring other arenas, returning to our wider home, our wider self, our wider guidance, and bringing back knowledge and insight from that place. Dreams are the packaged metaphors that come back to us, these packaged stories, to help us understand where we're at right now and also where it is our spirit is asking us to go. It's also a place where we can communicate with other consciousnesses besides our own. So you might have encounters with plants in your dreams. You might have encounters with people who've passed on. And these are like very literal remembrances of you having these interactions with these different consciousnesses. And I think dreams are some of the most potent and spontaneous sources of intuitive information that we can really receive. I had the fortune of being able to study with Robert Moss, who is a dream teacher who teaches around the world. And I really recommend his books to people who are interested in this concept of really working with their dreams as a way to connect into what I call their wider selves, because I personally have found that it is just such a potent way to deepen this intuitive practice. And I agree with you so wholeheartedly about the importance of sleep. I am someone who has suffered on and off again with insomnia my whole life. And only, and I'm someone who needs about 10 hours of sleep. So
Yeah, me
you
too.
can, you can imagine that, like, my normal schedule is like waking up around 11 in the morning. And, anyways, so it really wasn't until recently that I had the insight. I really realized that I was like, wow, I'm having insomnia because I'm anxious. And I'm anxious because I'm overwhelmed. It's actually that simple. And even though when I was laying in bed I didn't feel anxious, I would be having all kinds of ideas of things I wanted to do in the future, or ways I wanted to work on different projects, or people I wanted to reach out to. Like, it didn't feel negative, but it was a kind of anxious energy that was coming from my nervous system being overwhelmed. And it was a huge light bulb moment for me, because once I realized that, I realized, okay, I need actually about 2 hours of calming down before I go to bed. Like, some people, I bless their hearts, and I have people in my life like this. Some people can, like, literally go up until they lay their head on the pillow and go to sleep. And that is not me. I need 2 hours of, like, no screen time, of quietude, of, very gentle music, of meditation or yoga or reading, like real, like, or maybe snuggling, but just real decompression time. And if I take that time before I go to bed, then I can actually fall asleep. But, all the sleep herbs in the world aren't going to knock you out and put you to sleep if what your nervous system is really needing is, like you said, this silence and this space and this quietude.
Yeah, it's interesting because my partner and I don't have a TV. We don't watch a lot of programs, but lately we were interested. We got on Netflix and we wanted to watch something, and we did so in the evening, so we weren't used to it anymore. And oh my goodness, the way that it's impacted our nervous systems, just watching any show really at that time was it was pretty remarkable, and I didn't realize how much of an impact it would have on me. And then I thought about all of the years that I also suffered from insomnia, and like how much was in my life in terms of the things that were pinging my senses, my nervous system for so long. It's like, well, no wonder I couldn't sleep, but at that time it was like, why can't I sleep? I'm trying all the things, all the supplements and all the herbs. And so I think what you're really painting is like this kind of zooming out and looking at these patterns in our lives and getting really honest with ourselves about, maybe things have shifted over time. Maybe it's supposed to look a little bit differently for me now. I'm hearing people as we're speaking, right? And they're listening to our conversation. I'm hearing people that are really speaking to, okay, well, I'm like a really busy mama that has a full-time job, and I really try to have time for myself. And it's really difficult to carve that out. What would you say to those who feel like they're kind of trapped in the busyness of this world?
Well, that's really real. I mean, having kids, especially young kids, and, taking care of a family is incredibly time consuming. And, one thing I would just say for that is, I know for myself in the past, when I've been in a very, very busy phase of my life, it's felt like I'm too busy to even like try. So I just didn't do it at all. And I found, like, even if it's just 5 minutes, like, even if it's just that you, before bed, your kids are asleep, you go into your room, you close the door, maybe even go into the closet to get your own space. You listen to a 5-minute meditation, to just create that space. Like, even just 5 minutes will help to shift it. And I think there's something that happens when we can gift ourselves that time, that something in our consciousness starts to change and time starts to work a little bit differently for us. And it doesn't mean that you'll find more hours in the day, but it does mean that those 5 minutes might start to feel more and more impactful. At first, the 5 minutes might feel like you're barely scratching the surface, but if 5 minutes is really all you can have, or all that you have, the only time that you have, the more you make that space and you take that 5 minutes every day, the more nourishing those 5 minutes will be, because basically you're working on this on a cumulative level. So, that's what I would say. And I know for a fact that all of us can find 5 minutes. And so that is the thing that I tell myself when I get very busy. And sometimes, for me, this has looked like staying up after, my partner has gone to sleep, and being like, okay, I'm going to take this 5 minutes right now. And I find that the 5 minutes naturally turns into 15 minutes or 20 minutes because I'm just enjoying it so much, being in the quietude. Or I have some friends who are mamas who they wake up early so they can just drink their coffee and just be in a really quiet house for, 10, 15 minutes. And I think we then get very focused on like, well, what about, my sleep time, for example? But I think when we take this time when we're replenishing while we're awake, again, even if it's just 5 minutes, then I think we actually sleep deeper and we are more refilled than if we just collapse from a state of stress and exhaustion into bed and wake up right into that state again.
Totally. Yeah. And like feeding our bodies into that parasympathetic to really nourish our nerves again and give us a chance to recoup. Because I feel like that's part of it, is we'll get in this mind trap, where we're kind of in the what is that, like the mouse wheel, in the cage, and we're going when really we can make that conscious choice.
Right.
Well, one of the things that I love that you speak to is the heart connection. And speaking of, perception and sympathetic, parasympathetic, the power of heart connection to plants and to intuition. What are some ways that people can begin to open up that heart connection? Because I feel like, especially in these times, there are a lot of things that are going on that kind of can harden our heart, so to speak. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear you speak to that, the heart and the heart connection.
Yeah, so there's really cool research being done by the HeartMath Institute and other folks who are basically looking at the heart as, on a scientific and energetic level, this first perceptor of our body, like the first one who's perceiving the world and actually taking in all this information and sending this information to our brain. And they've found that there's more neural pathways from our heart to our brain than our brain to our heart. So there is evidence that our heart is the one that's gathering all this sensory information and sending it to the computer that is our brain, so it can put in all the data and sort of spit back out to the different parts of our body, like the right action to take from there. So if we want to really be able to make good decisions and to really open our perception and our awareness in a deeper way, then really being in this heart space is incredibly important. And if anyone's ever fallen in love, for example, you might have noticed when you're in that state of being in love that you notice things you don't normally notice. Like I remember the first time I fell in love when I was when I was a teenager, I noticed for the first time ever that plants bloom every spring. Like it never hit me before then. And then I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh, the trees are in flower. Every spring they flower. And it was like this whole new world was revealed to me. And it was because my heart was just so open. So really, I hear you with this piece of like, we live in a hard time where there's so much, and it's so overwhelming, and there's like so much grief, and there's so much sorrow, and there's so much to kind of reckon with happening now, and also, in our history. I think the biggest way, the most direct way to open our heart to perceiving, which also means perceiving other possibilities. It's like our brain can only can only compute what our life experience has been. And so we're limited in what we can conceive of as possibilities for healing and ways of moving forward if we're only operating from our brain. Our heart is taking in the entire field of what's present right now. And it's also taking in the collective wisdom of the other beings that we're literally sharing this heart space with. And so the easiest way to drop into our heart and open that awareness of possibilities is gratitude. So for years now, I've had a practice of morning gratitudes where every morning I give gratitude for the various aspects of my life. So I give gratitude for people in my life. I give gratitude for my body, for the land that I'm on, for my ancestors. I give gratitude for the things that are really wonderful. And I also give gratitude for the things that are really hard. So I make it a practice to think about what feels really challenging in my life, relationships, health issues. I think about things that feel really painful in the world that I'm aware of, even people who I find very triggering in the world at large, and people who are in the public arena, what have you. And I find a way to give gratitude for them. Or for this issue. Like I remember when I was dealing with Lyme disease, every morning I would give gratitude for the spirochetes, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease inside my body. And some mornings it was very hard to do. But every time I did it and found a way to be grateful for the way in which that experience was opening me up to, for example, further levels of compassion and being able to then have more compassionate empathy for other people who are going through hard times or chronic illness, when I could find that gratitude, it always opened my heart space. And then that sense of connection, belonging, intuition would always come in.
That's so powerful. And it's interesting with the Akashic record work, the way to connect with the Akashics and the spirit guides through that channel is with a heart connection. It's with that, creating that direct connection with your heart. And that requires us to drop in, as you're saying, And I found that that's true for myself when I was really starting this practice. Just naturally, the way that I got into it the most quickly was to be in that state of gratitude and appreciation. And it just makes you feel so damn good, that you want to do more of it, which is really cool. But I wanted to also mention for this podcast episode, sometimes I pick a tarot card if I'm feeling it, and I was really feeling it today. And I use, this is the Pagan Otherworlds card. And what's interesting was the card that came through was the Seeker, which isn't a traditional card in the tarot, but it is in this deck. And it made me really think about our connection to the unseen world and plants and the elementals and all the beings through our heart, and really looking at what the pagan Celtic term called thin places, those thin places of where the veil is thinner between the divine and our earthly space. And I thought it was so appropriate for today. I wanted to mention that. I'm curious in terms of connecting through that thin veil, some of your experiences with plants in opening that heart connection. Are there any particular plants or other beings of consciousness that you find that are really helpful to help nourish and open that heart space?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I did not mention hawthorn in this particular juncture. So hawthorn is a really traditional tree of the Celts and was considered to really be the gatekeeper of the heart. Hawthorn was the place where you could enter and access the other world, including the realm of the Sidhe or the Fae. And there's many stories of people falling asleep underneath the hawthorn tree and being whisked away to the fairy realm to dance all night and then coming back and finding they've actually been gone for a decade. But there's something really important here in these stories, which is the realization that opening the heart actually changes our perception of time, and it changes our ability to perceive into these other realms. So in Celtic medicine, the hawthorn was just really the tree of the heart. And we now know that hawthorn berries are a really powerful cardiotonic. They actually help the muscle of our heart be stronger, pump. It's one of the most popular medicines of commerce for its actions on the heart, including its ability to lower our blood pressure and lower heart rate. But for the Celts, it was also this energetic medicine of really nourishing the heart, especially in times of grief, and nourishing the heart for those who feel like they don't belong in this world, and really knowing how to have good boundaries so that our heart can be so open to things that we want to be so open to, and that we can know how to actually have good shields to the things that don't need to come inside of our energetic space. So if you ever see a hawthorn, one of its main doctrine of signatures is that it has these thorns, these very straight thorns that they're not like blackberry thorns where they'll snag you if you just walk past it. They're only the kind of thorns that will get you if you're just really not conscious and you're really not paying attention to how you're harvesting or interacting with the plant. And so these thorns really are sort of letting us know this truth of the fact of that our heart, with our heart, we need to have good boundaries, and good boundaries is how we, maintain ourselves as vessels, is how we are good channels. It's how we know to be open to the good stuff and know to shield ourselves from the stuff that would really just drain us or deplete us. And the hawthorn tree blooms around the Celtic holiday of Beltane, and it fruits around the Celtic holiday of Samhain. Beltane happening at the beginning of May, and Samhain happening at the end of October around what we now call Halloween. So these were both times of the year where the veil was considered to be really thin. So hawthorn was this gatekeeper of the veils between the worlds, and the way in which it grows and when it blooms and when it fruits, which is what we call sort of the doctrine of signatures, shows us that, the hawthorn as an herb is really good at helping us to mediate and connect to these other realms. So one of my favorite ways of working with hawthorn is to use the berries in tea. It's really lovely. And then you're also getting the physical effects or constituents of this lovely cardiotonic. But I also really enjoy hawthorn flower essence. And one of my favorite things is when I make a flower essence is actually to put one thorn in the essence. So I have an essence on my website that I sell that's hawthorn essence that's made with the flowers and the thorn, because I feel energetically it's kind of an important component, and it kind of rounds out the sense of hawthorn medicine.
I love that. Yes. And one of the plants that when I moved to Oregon and really started connecting more deeply with the plants in this area was wild rose. And I experienced it very similarly. And I love that you include the thorn, because that was such a huge aspect aside from the flower. I feel like so often beauty in the way, of like the conventional concept of beauty would direct our attention to the actual flower. And I appreciate that you just bring it back to the whole plant and these other components that have so much medicine. I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, Asia, we have a question that we ask everybody who comes on. And that is, what is feeding your wild?
Yeah, I would have to say one thing that's really feeding my wild right now is going for all weather walks. So I kind of make it a thing where I go for a half an hour walk every day, like rain or shine. And it actually really feeds my wild to go out when the weather is not that great. Like when it's really raining out like it is today, or if it's, snowy or icy or whatever it is. Like we had an ice storm here a few weeks ago, and I still made myself go out for half an hour, and I couldn't even walk up the hill. It was too icy. So I just kind of puttered around where I could. But the idea of and the experience of exposing myself to the weather elements, it does so much to kind of like bring up my own inner wildness and release me from the patterns of thought and like being that are kind of like really keeping me in a box. And so I think that's what I'd say. Like my half an hour all weather walks are really feeding my wild right now.
I love it. Yes. I bet you learned so much about your body and yourself by doing that, like getting your butt out in the freezing cold.
Yes, definitely. And it's experience. I think we're meant to experience different kinds of weather. It's our body kind of craves it. I mean, obviously not to the point where we're going to, take down our systems or anything like that, but just really exposing yourself to the elements can do so much to just open up so much inspiration.
Well, we have so much that people can dive into today. I feel like re-listening to this over and over, there are so many pearls. And I know that a lot of folks are going to be interested in how you overcame chronic pain and the medicine that you bring. And I know you have some brilliant courses and offerings that share really empowering information. So I'd love for you to share, where can people learn more? And I know that you're also going to be offering a free course. So give all that information and we'd love to dive in.
Yeah. So the free course is called Opening Earth Intuition, and that is going to be coming out with my newsletter at the end of March. So if folks are interested in that, they can navigate over to my website and sign up for the newsletter to hear about when that launches. And so this is it's really about a lot of what we've been talking about, of opening your intuition through interacting with the natural world. And then in the beginning of May, I start the next year, the new round of my class, Intuitive Plant Medicine, it goes from Beltane to summer solstice every year. And it's all about opening these different gateways of working with plant medicine from an intuitive space and an intuitive level. So that class is awesome and wonderful and draws people from all around the world. So if that's something you're interested in, stay tuned, because registration's only open for a couple weeks in April. But I do have some online classes on my website that are available all the time. So I have shorter classes for purchase on the website if you want to check them out. And one of them is called Multidimensional Vaginal Healing. So that class is sort of a deep dive into my experience with chronic pain, and so much of what I learned about how healing in this area of our bodies is really meant to be multidimensional. And then because I just loved creating that smaller resource so much, I ended up bringing in a whole host of guest teachers and creating an even larger portal that I'm calling the Pussy Portal, that is just an incredible collection of information about all things having to do with healing and the root of our bodies. And so that is something that is available if folks find that the multidimensional healing is really opening up this gateway for them to want to go deeper. And the website's the place for all of those things. And I would just love to connect with any of you who are listening and really feel drawn to this work and the community that it naturally develops.
And I know the seekers and all of us are going to just eat it all up and fill our bellies and our hearts with your heart medicine. So thank you so much, Asia, for sharing all the work that you do and for coming on and sharing your medicine today.
Oh, thank you so much, Vanessa. This has been so wonderful.
Hey there, I made something for you. One of the biggest challenges that I hear from people is that they are feeling stuck when it comes to their health. You're a smart, capable, and creative change maker, right? And you know what you should be doing for your health. So what gives? Well, it's not about willpower. And I wanted to create something that would help you to unlearn the things that are keeping you stuck so that you can get out of your own way and master the mindset of health. That's why I created Wildly Unstuck, where you'll learn the top 5 things that I have found to sabotage your health goals and what to do about them. You'll learn what it really takes to become committed and unstoppable when it comes to your health goals, and find the clarity you've been looking for so you know exactly what to do to get back into alignment. And I made it totally free. So if this is something that you want to dive into and create a vision and soul goals for your health and your life and bring your gifts to the world, because we know that we need it, then I invite you to join us in Wildly Unstuck. You can find that at wildlyrooted.com/unstuck. I'll see you on the other side.